Namaskar, I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Welcome to Global Scan. Now, this is a special edition. In the next 1 hour, we'll reflect on the big developments across the globe in the whole of 2019, the direction that the world took in issues of politics, climate change, democracy, and more. In many ways, they give us a glimpse of what to expect in the new year. Let's begin with the highlights that made 2019 special. Donald Trump becomes third president in American history to be impeached. Majority of representatives vote in favor of 2 articles of impeachment drawn up by House Democrats. Trump accused of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, both related to Ukraine scandal. The ball is now in Senate's court. Boris Johnson's course landslide win in UK elections secures a crushing victory as voters back his promise to get Brexit done and take the country out of the European Union by 31st January next year. Seeks to speed up approval by Parliament of his withdrawal agreement with the European Union and start ploughing money into health, education and police. World Court orders Pakistan to review the death penalty given in 2017 to former Indian Navy commander Kulbhushan Jadhav, who was convicted of being a spy. Gambia files case at ICJ, alleges Myanmar of committing genocide against minority Muslim Rohingyas. Pakistan's former dictator Pervez Musharraf sentenced to death in high treason case for subverting constitution. Civil unrest flares up across the world in 2019. Anti-government protests rock Hong Kong for months against plans to allow extradition to mainland China. Bill withdrawn in September, but demonstrations continue and now demand full democracy and inquiry into police actions. Workers protest in France against government's plan to raise the retirement age to 64, among the many other grievances. Pope Francis ends secrecy rule on child sexual abuse in Catholic Church. Pontifical secrecy, no more an excuse for church officials to refuse to share information. So, Donald Trump becomes the third president in the US history to be impeached. But will he be the first to be ousted or not? Well, only the new year can tell. But 2019 was about US President facing 2 serious charges in the House of Representatives and getting impeached. First charge, misuse of his position to have another country, another government, Ukraine, investigate his political rival Joe Biden. And the second, to obstruct the investigation by the Congress. Now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has delayed President Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate over format issues. President Trump has expressed anger and indifference over the proceedings, on one occasion saying that I don't feel I'm getting impeached.
Donald Trump becomes the third US president in history to be impeached by the House of Representatives. It all centers on whether or not he improperly sought help from Ukraine to boost his chances of re-election in 2020. He's accused of 2 charges. It all started with a formal complaint from a whistleblower, an unnamed intelligence official who wrote a letter expressing concern about Trump's call on July 25th with President of Ukraine. The call came shortly after Trump had blocked the release of millions of dollars in US military aid to Ukraine. A senior official later testified that the president made clear the release of the aid was conditional on Biden being investigated. Its aim was to get Ukraine to open an investigation into Biden's and declare as much publicly. Trump allegedly urged President to investigate discredited allegation against Joe and Hunter Biden. The first charge in abuse of power stemming from Trump's alleged attempt to pressure Ukraine to announce investigation into his Democratic political rival Joe Biden. The second charge is obstruction of Congress because the president allegedly refused to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry, withholding documentary evidence and barring his key aides from giving evidence. The House action sets the stage for trial next month in the Republican-controlled Senate on whether to convict him and remove him from the office. The House will select lawmakers known as managers to present the case against Trump at the Senate trial. House Democrats say most of the managers are likely to come from Judiciary Committee and possibly from Intelligence Committee that led the investigation. US Chief Justice John Roberts will preside over the trial. House managers will present their case against Trump and the president's legal team will respond. Senators will act as jurors. A trial could involve testimony from witness and ruling schedule in which proceedings occur 6 days a week for as many as 6 weeks. The first of the article accused Trump of abusing his power by pressurizing Ukraine to investigate political rival Joe Biden, a leading contender for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, as well as a discredited theory promoted by President and beneficial to Russia that Democrats conspired with Ukraine to meddle in 2016 election. The second article accuses Trump of obstruction of Congress by directing administration officials and agencies not to comply with lawful House subpoenas for testimony and documents related to impeachment. But Donald Trump has denied wrongdoing so far. No president in the 243-year history of the United States has been removed from office by impeachment. It requires a two-thirds majority in 100-member Senate, meaning at least 20 Republicans would have to join Democrats in voting against Trump. And none have indicated they will. With Bureau Inputs, Global Scan Desk, DD India.
Now, amidst the continued logjam over Brexit, much-needed stability came to the political landscape of UK through the general elections. Conservatives registered a decisive win and Boris Johnson returned as the Prime Minister. Johnson has already won the approval for his Brexit deal in Parliament, taking the first step towards fulfilling his election promise of taking Britain out of the European Union by the end of January 2020.
The protracted uncertainty over Brexit that haunted Britain seems to have ended. Prime Minister Boris Johnson won a resounding election victory that will allow him to end 3 years of political paralysis and take Britain out of the European Union by January 31. Brexit represents the country's biggest political and economic gamble since World War II, cutting the world's fifth largest economy adrift from the vast trading bloc and threatening the integrity of United Kingdom. For Johnson, who campaigned on the promise to get Brexit done, victory was a vindication after anti-Brexit opponents tried one maneuver after another to thwart him during his first chaotic months in office. In England, the Conservatives won large numbers of seats in opposition Labour Party's so-called Red Wall, declining industrial heartlands once hostile to Johnson's party. Brexit, which has shattered old party loyalties and divided Britain along new fault lines, was the cause of the shift. In the Red Wall, a majority of voters favoured leaving the European Union and rejected Labour Party's ambiguous stance on the issue. Johnson will now be able to lead Britain out of EU 10 months after the original deadline of March 29, which was repeatedly pushed back as a gridlocked parliament failed to take any clear decisions on Brexit. However, with the complex task of negotiating country's future relationship with the bloc is still ahead. PM may struggle to reunite a divided nation. After January 31, Britain will enter a transition period during which it will negotiate a new relationship with the EU. This can run until the end of 2022, but the Conservatives have pledged not to extend the transition beyond 2020. The final stages of rectification will take place with the lower house of Parliament having until January 9 to approve legislation or withdraw agreement will, giving it just over 3 weeks to then pass through the upper house and receive royal assent. After leaving, Britain will need to secure new trading arrangements with EU, which the Prime Minister said would see the country agree a trade deal with no alignment to the bloc rules. In a change to the bill, Johnson made it illegal to extend those talks beyond the end of next year. With Bureau Inputs, Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And while some nations in the world witness decisive political mandate, many continue to grapple with political instability. Israel will head for the third general election in less than a year. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has scored a landslide victory in a primary race for leadership of the ruling Likud party, which has given the embattled leader an important boost ahead of the country's next elections. Meanwhile, hung parliaments are becoming a norm in Spain since 2015. Governments of Malta, Bolivia face serious charges of corruption and misconduct. Finnish Prime Minister Antti Rinne resigned over his handling of a postal strike. He was replaced by 34-year-old Social Democrat Sanna Marin as the world's youngest serving Prime Minister.
2019 was a year of lows for many countries across the globe. From Israel to Spain to Malta to Finland to Bolivia, political crisis was witnessed everywhere. Unable to form a government after 2 elections, the deeply polarized country will return to the polls for a third time in less than a year. With Netanyahu's fate in question, Israel is all set for fresh polls. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing the fight of his life for political survival after a criminal indictment. In the 2 previous national elections, Netanyahu's opponents focused on the 3 corruption investigations against him that included allegations that he dispensed favors to media barons in a push for more favorable media coverage. But this time, Israel's longest-serving leader is running under the cloud of a criminal indictment announced last month. Despite all this, Prime Minister Netanyahu is under no legal obligation to resign as a result of the indictment, and while in office, he can ask the legislature to grant him immunity from prosecution. As caretaker premier, he will remain on the post until a new government is formed. In Spain, national elections since 2015 have resulted in hung parliaments, forcing the winner to try to negotiate support from others to form a government. Socialist leader Sanchez got the most votes but failed to get a majority in the November general election, the second vote in 1 year. Sanchez secured a preliminary coalition deal with far-left Unidas Podemos, but together the parties have 155 seats, short of the 176 seats needed for a majority in parliament. The shortage of seats has left Sanchez and his party courting Catalan separatist party ERC, whose 13 seats mean the party has a chance to play the role of potential kingmaker in the government. In Malta, Prime Minister Joseph Muscat is facing criticism over his government's handling of investigations into the murder of anti-corruption journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia. Maltese opposition leaders joined protesters outside Parliament to demand Prime Minister Joseph Muscat's resignation. Calls for Muscat to resign grew after a probe into the 2017 car bomb killing of Galizia led to charges being laid on 30th November against businessman Jorgen Fenech with alleged ties to government ministers and officials. Policemen and soldiers rushed inside Maltese Prime Minister's building as activists staged a noisy protest to demand Joseph Muscat's immediate resignation amid an investigation into the 2017 killing of the journalist. The political stability of the tiny Mediterranean island has been rocked in recent weeks by the fallout from the murder of the anti-corruption journalist who was blown up by a car bomb. In Finland, the government resigned last week after the Centre Party said it had lost confidence in Social Democrat Prime Minister Antti Rinne over his handling of a postal strike. Finland's parliament approved the nomination of 34-year-old Social Democrat Sanna Marin as the world's youngest serving Prime Minister. Out of the parliament's 200 members, 99 voted in favour and 70 against Marin's nomination as the Nordic country's new Prime Minister. In Bolivia, the vote-rigging scandal forced Evo Morales to resign and leave Bolivia in mid-November. Morales, who had been in power for nearly 14 years, resigned and left Bolivia after an Organization of American States audit found serious irregularities in the way votes were counted in the 20th October election. He resigned under pressure from the armed forces and maintains that he was ousted in a right-wing coup. After interim Bolivian President Jenin Áñez took over, lawmakers passed a bill that bars candidates who have already served 2 presidential terms, eliminating Morales from the race. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
Pakistan's former dictator Pervez Musharraf moved Lahore High Court, challenging the death sentence given to him by a court in a treason case. The special court had convicted 76-year-old Musharraf of violating the constitution by unlawfully declaring emergency rule while he was in power. 2019 witnessed many high-profile court cases and orders. International Court of Justice ordered Pakistan to review the death penalty given to former Indian Navy commander Kulbhushan Jadhav. In another case at the ICJ, Myanmar civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi mounted a defense of her homeland, calling claims of genocide incomplete and misleading. This was the day after tribunal heard damning accounts of atrocities inflicted on the minority ethnic Rohingyas.
A number of cases made the headlines in 2019 across the globe. It started with Kulbhushan Jadhav. The entire world watched as the International Court of Justice at The Hague delivered its verdict on the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. The World Court ordered Pakistan to review the death penalty given in 2017 to former Indian Navy commander Kulbhushan Jadhav, who was convicted of being a spy. The 16-judge panel said Pakistan has to provide an effective review of the case and added that a continued stay of execution of Jadhav was needed for that to happen. The court dismissed that argument and found by 15 votes to 1 that Pakistan had breached Jadhav's rights under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations by not allowing Indian diplomats to visit him in jail or assist him during his trial at a military court. The case dates back to 2017 when a Pakistan Army court had sentenced Jadhav to death on charges of espionage and terror. That year in May itself, the Indian government approached the ICJ for justice. In response, a 10-judge bench of the court directed the Pakistan government to stay Jadhav's execution on the 18th of May 2017 till it delivered its verdict in the case. Pakistan had maintained that Jadhav had entered the country through Iran, while India says that he was actually abducted by Pakistan from Iran, where he had gone for business purposes. India continued to reiterate that Pakistan's repeated refusals to allow consular access to Jadhav was violative of the Vienna Convention of 1963. The genocide case against Myanmar also came up at the top UN court. The West African country of Gambia filed a case in November alleging Myanmar was committing an ongoing genocide against its minority Muslim Rohingya population. Lawyers said Aung San Suu Kyi had ignored widespread allegations of mass murder, rape and forced deportation. The Nobel Peace Prize laureate defended her country, calling the case incomplete and incorrect. Suu Kyi acknowledged there may have been some war crimes or crimes against humanity, but insisted none of these rose to the level of genocide, for which the specific intent to destroy a group has to be proven. She called on the judges to dismiss the accusation and said her country's own justice system should be given the chance to work first. A Pakistani court sentenced former military dictator Pervez Musharraf to death in absentia on Tuesday on treason charges stemming from his imposition of a state of emergency in 2007. Musharraf, who seized power in a 1999 coup and later ruled as president until 2008, is out of the country and did not comment on a ruling widely seen as part of a standoff between the judiciary and the military over the rule of law. Musharraf at 76 is the first former army chief to be charged with treason in Pakistan and has said the powerful military helped him get out of the country. Musharraf imposed a state of emergency at a time when he faced growing opposition to his rule. All civil liberties, human rights and democratic processes were suspended from November 2007 to Feb 2008. The final years of his rule were marked by struggles with the judiciary over his wish to remain head of the army while president. He quit in 2008 after a political party that backed him fared poorly in a national election. Fugitive billionaire jeweler Nirav Modi, wanted by Indian authorities over a $2 billion loan fraud at the state-run Punjab National Bank, was remanded in custody after appearing before a British court. The diamond magnate was arrested in the Holborn area of central London after he went into a bank to open an account and a member of the staff contacted police. India asked Britain last August to extradite Nirav Modi after he was accused of massive bank fraud. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
While corrupt governments and authoritarian regimes are nothing new for the world, 2019 will be remembered for the manner in which people of all age groups, but especially the youth, came together and hit the road across countries and continents, fighting for their rights and freedoms. The large-scale protests are likely to force governments world over to look for better solutions for their people in the new year.
Public unrest flared up across the world in 2019 like it had not in nearly half a century. fueled by growing discontent with living costs to resistance against authoritarian and often corrupt governments. Masses, particularly the youth, braved crackdown by the state and hit the roads in defense of their rights, demands, and at places for democracy. In Hong Kong, university students and people from all sections of the society stood up against a controversial extradition bill. The bill was eventually withdrawn, but protests continued against alleged police brutality and the government's handling of the crisis. At the heart of it also lied opposition to growing Chinese influence over the city. Thousands of protesters were arrested by the police. In mid-November, students turned several university campuses into fortresses, barricading themselves inside and clashing with riot police on the periphery. Hong Kong held a citywide election on November 24th that pro-democracy candidates won in a landslide with a record high turnout. However, China has warned that any attempt at independence will be crushed. What started as a protest by high school students against rise in metro ticket prices in Santiago soon transformed into full-blown civil rebellion against larger inequalities, deficient public services and a repressive government. Mostly peaceful protest marches were marred by occasional cases of looting, arson attacks on supermarkets and government buildings. Clamped down by the Sebastian Piñera government only aggravated the public resentment. However, later he softened his stand and apologized for the short-sightedness and unveiled some quick fixes such as a slight rise in minimum wages. A latest report suggests crackdowns on protests in Chile have resulted in most serious human rights violations in 30 years since the country was ruled by military dictatorship. Driven by increasing unemployment rate and poverty, young jobless youth in Iraq protested against the worsening living conditions in the war-ravaged nation. The protests were further fueled by charges of corruption against the government and its failure to revive a struggling economy. Hundreds of casualties were reported in the violent crackdown by security forces. Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mehdi resigned in response, but protesters want to sweep away the entire political establishment. They have blocked roads, oil facilities and ports and clashed with security forces. In November 2018, French citizens took to streets across the country wearing yellow, high-visibility vests to protest the rising fuel prices intended to achieve France's climate agenda. Demonstrations rapidly spread and still continue over a year later, triggering the worst violence Paris has seen in recent years. Towards the end of 2019, multiple unions across France launched a strike with intention to shut down the country and force President Emmanuel Macron to re-evaluate his plans for pension reform. 65,000 people demonstrated in Paris. Thousands more joined them in the interiors. Tourist sites like the Eiffel Tower and transportation in the European nation was paralyzed. Similar protests were registered across the world. London, Lebanon, Bolivia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Pakistan and elsewhere. Protests appear to derive energy from increasing inequality in our societies, stagnating middle class and a state that is refusing to relent to the aspirations of its people. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
The world's two largest economies, United States and China, have been locked in a bitter trade war, it's called. The dispute has seen the US and China impose tariffs of hundreds of billions of dollars worth on one another's goods. US President Donald Trump has long accused China of unfair trading practices and intellectual property theft. On the other hand, in China, there is a perception that US is trying to curb its rise as a global economic power. However, some resolution is visible on the horizon as phase one of the trade deal between the two nations has been agreed upon. Trade tensions between Japan and South Korea also peaked in 2019. Here's more.
War of words, war of economies. 2019 had it all. The US-China trade dispute, which has been lingering on for over a year now, saw the US and China impose tariffs of hundreds of billions of dollars on each other. And it's not just them. Tension was witnessed in Japan and South Korea as well. Japan's decision to remove Seoul's favored trade partner status sparked fresh tensions. There seems to be some respite in trade between US and China. Both countries have now reached their Phase 1 deal, averting the December 15th introduction of a new wave of US tariffs on about $160 billion of consumer goods. However, the economies have been at loggerheads with each other for a very long time. The ties strained further in May this year when Trump stated that the previous tariffs of 10% levied on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods would be raised to 25%. And then the trade war intensified. US accused China of unfair trade practices. US imposed tariffs on more than $360 billion of Chinese goods. Washington delivered 3 rounds of tariffs in 2018, 4th in September 2019. Beijing retaliated with duties on $110 billion worth of American products. US President in May 2019 increased pressure on China by announcing a 25% increase in tariffs on Chinese products. US added Huawei Technologies company and 70 affiliates to entry list to ban Huawei. Banned Huawei from acquiring components and technology from US firms without prior approval. Beijing hit back with tariffs ranging from 5 to 25% on US goods. Tariff strike included 5% levy on US crude oil, first time fuel has been hit in the trade battle. The United States and China's trade negotiators met in October for resolution. In December, US and China reached the Phase 1 trade deal. The deal is expected to be signed in January 2020. In China, there is perception that US is trying to curb its rise. After signing of the Phase 1 deal, Washington is expected to relieve some US tariffs on Chinese goods, while there will be more Chinese purchases of American agricultural products. The deal presented to Trump by trade advisors included a promise by the Chinese to buy more US agricultural goods. Officials also discussed possible reduction of existing duties on Chinese products. US President Donald Trump said he and Chinese President Xi Jinping will have a signing ceremony to sign the first phase of the US-China trade deal agreed to this month. Beijing has not yet confirmed specific components of the deal that were released by US officials. A spokesman for China's commerce industries said last week the details would be made public after the official signing. The US-China trade war is not the only one which made headlines in 2019. The trade war between Japan and South Korea also affected the global economy at large. The already strained ties between the nations experienced a new low after Japan in August announced to remove South Korea from its so-called white list, a list that gives trade advantage to preferred countries, and then came South Korea's response. It all started in 2018. South Korea's top court ordered a Japanese firm to compensate Koreans it used as forced labor in World War II. The issue angered many in South Korea, with people boycotting Japanese goods. It also led to a flare-up in tensions over a group of islands claimed by both countries. August 2019, Japan announced it was going to remove Seoul's favored trade partner status. It imposed export controls on its important electronics sector, vital for South Korean companies. Seoul then announced it has decided to end the country's intelligence sharing pact because of the decision. However, it cancelled the decision in November 2019. The Japanese trade war with South Korea seems to be diminishing as Japan recently announced a partial ease of restrictions on exports of semiconductor material to South Korea. Under the new measure, Japan will grant 3-year permits to transactions of photoresist, a chemical used to produce semiconductors, between certain companies from Japan and South Korea. In response to the step taken by Japan, South Korea replied that it is a partial progress but can't fundamentally solve the export curb issue. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
Moving on, Pope Francis announced sweeping changes to the way the Roman Catholic Church deals with cases of sexual abuse of minors, abolishing the rule of pontifical secrecy that previously covered them. Advocates for the victims of sex abuse scandal that has rocked the church for nearly 2 decades applauded the move as being long overdue, but said it had to be applied broadly. 2 documents issued by the Pope back practices that have been in place in some countries, particularly the United States, such as reporting suspicion of sex abuse to civil authorities where required by law. The documents that put the practices into universal church law also forbid imposing an obligation of silence on those who report sex abuse or allege that they have been victims. The lifting of pontifical secrecy in sex abuse investigations was a key demand by church leaders, including Cecilia German Cardinal Reinhard Marx in a summit on sexual abuse held at the Vatican in February. While climate activist Greta Thunberg made it to the front page of Time magazine and protesters thronged the streets asking their leaders to think green, little was achieved at the COP25 climate summit in Madrid. No consensus was reached on something as basic as what our individual carbon footprint is going to be ahead. The big emitters were accused of not doing enough. Meanwhile, 2019 turned out to be one of the warmest years on record. Various climate calamities struck different parts of the world. Amazon forest fires and Australian bushfires scorched the planet. Ice sheets of Antarctica are melting faster than ever.
From raging fires in Amazon and Australia to devastating cyclones and floods in India, from the rising waters in Venice to disappearing glaciers in Iceland, climate calamities continued throughout 2019, affecting countries and communities across the world. Amidst these disturbing developments, UN-led climate summit COP25 in Madrid provided little hope or relief. Iceland marked its first ever loss of a glacier to climate change as scientists warn that hundreds of other ice sheets on the subarctic island risk the same fate. A bronze plaque was mounted on the bare rock in a ceremony on the barren terrain once covered by the Ojkul Glacier in western Iceland. Severe flooding in Venice left much of the Italian city underwater. The waters in Venice peaked at 1.87 meters. Locals and tourists throughout the city waded through the floodwaters. The rising waters caused significant structural damage to historic buildings and threatened numerous artifacts. As ice caps are melting at a faster rate than ever before, sea levels are rising and making cities like Venice increasingly vulnerable. In India, more than 2,100 people lost their lives and millions rendered homeless in the devastating floods due to delayed and extended monsoon rains. The rainfall recorded was the heaviest in 25 years. Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka were some of the worst affected states. Earlier, extremely severe cyclonic storm Fani made landfall on the Odisha coast. There was significant damage in coastal areas, although extensive evacuations greatly reduced the impact. This year's August Amazon fires grabbed headlines around the world. Some 87,000 forest fires were recorded in Brazil, causing irreversible damage to the rainforests and its rich ecosystem. Forest fires are common in the Amazon during dry season, but this year, most are believed to have been started by farmers and loggers clearing land for crops or grazing. Altogether, 7,604 square kilometers of rainforest were felled during the first 9 months of this year, an 85% increase over the same period last year. Bushfires continue to burn in several regions of Australia amid unusually high temperatures, bringing grave harm to people and wildlife. Australia experienced its hottest day on record a couple of weeks ago. In the worst affected state, New South Wales, fires have burned more than 3 million hectares, destroying more than 800 houses. However, the severity of the climate crisis did not reflect in the urgency for real action among world leaders who congregated at the COP25 summit in Madrid in Spain. They were still mired in bureaucratic technicalities and individual national interests, while climate activists hit the streets in protests across the world. After 2 weeks of talks, envoys from almost 200 countries shelved work on adding market mechanisms as a tool to curb greenhouse gases, settling on a more limited set of measures to rein in climate change. Smaller nations showed commitment, but major emitters lacked will. This is despite a passionate appeal by UN Chief Antonio Guterres that time to act is now.
What is still lacking is political will. Political will to put a price on carbon. Political will to stop subsidies on fossil fuels. Political will to stop building coal power plants from 2020 onwards. Political will to shift taxation from income to carbon, taxing pollution instead of people. We simply have to stop digging and drilling and take advantage of the vast possibilities offered by renewable energy and nature-based solutions.
Climate experts say if countries do not take urgent action right now, then the world is heading for a temperature increase of more than 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, with ever more harmful impacts on human well-being. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And time now for all the action from the world of sports in 2019.
Full Full of action and drama, the year 2019 has been an extraordinary one in the arena of sports. While England lifted its first World Cup, Lionel Messi clinched another Ballon d'Or. We bring you some of the awe-inspiring moments of 2019 as we come closer to the end of the year. Let's start with cricket first. England could not have scripted a more dramatic finish to win their Cricket World Cup against New Zealand. 100 overs and a tie-breaking round of Super Over weren't enough for the teams to win the World Cup. England were then crowned world champions by virtue of having scored more boundary fours and sixes, 26 to New Zealand's 17 in the entire match. It was for the first time in history that India hosted its first day and night test match. India won against Bangladesh by an innings and 46 runs to record a victory in their first day-night pink ball test at the Eden Gardens in Kolkata. It was a memorable pink ball international debut for India, who became the only team to win 4 consecutive tests by an innings margin. Coming to football now, Liverpool defeated Tottenham Hotspur in the Champions League final to win its 6th European Cup. After defeating Bayern Munich in the round of 16, they proceeded to beat Porto and Barcelona in dramatic fashion before beating Tottenham Hotspur 2-0 to claim the greatest prize in club football. In addition to that, Liverpool also recorded a victory in FIFA Club World Cup over Brazil's Flamengo. In football, anything is possible. 13 times winners Real Madrid were drawn against English champions Manchester City in the UEFA Champions League. The draw for this football season's Champions League was announced in a ceremony at the Swiss city of Nyon. The year brought another good news for Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi clinched his 6th Ballon d'Or after yet another scintillating season for the Argentine. The 32-year-old saw off competition from the likes of Juventus' forward Cristiano Ronaldo and Liverpool defender Virgil van Dijk to win the prestigious accolade, which is voted for by journalists. The year in tennis came and went with familiar faces such as Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic, adding to their Grand Slam hauls. For the first time since 2008, Nadal reached at least the semi-finals at all 4 Grand Slams, winning the French Open for a mind-boggling 12th time and the US Open for a 4th time. Djokovic taking the Australian Open and Wimbledon. The Davis Cup this year went back to Spain. Host Spain saw off a youthful Canadian side to win the inaugural edition of the new-look Davis Cup and claim the team trophy for a 6th time. It was again Spain's talisman Rafael Nadal who sealed the triumph, beating 20-year-old Denis Shapovalov. Now about Formula One Grand Prix. Grand Prix champion Lewis Hamilton, who is a 6 times world champion, wrapped up the Formula One season in style by cruising unchallenged to a dominant victory in Abu Dhabi in his 250th Grand Prix. Hamilton's 84th career victory, a record 5th in Abu Dhabi, and the 11th of the season meant that the Briton equaled his own Formula One record of 33 consecutive finishes in the points. The year has certainly been an amazing one for Indian athletes. The 13th South Asian Games held in Nepal saw India winning the highest number of medals, setting a new world record. India topped the tally with 312 medals in its kitty, comprising 174 gold, 93 silver and 45 bronze. During the 10-day-long event, over 2,700 athletes from India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Pakistan and Maldives competed for 1,119 medals. India dominated the rifle and pistol shooting events in 2019, returning with a historic medal tally. Indian shooters ended their 4th edition of the World Cup Series with 22 medals, 16 gold, 4 silver and 2 bronze medals. As a bonus, they have won 9 quota places for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. Indian shooters secure unprecedented 15 quota places for Tokyo Olympics. However, the year did bring some bad news for Russia. Russia was handed a 4-year ban from all major sporting events by the World Anti-Doping Agency. It means the Russian national flag and anthem will not be allowed at events such as the Tokyo 2020 Olympics and football's 2022 World Cup in Qatar. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And after sports, let's get a recap of all the glitz, glamour and drama from the world of cinema.
The year 2019 has been full of glitz and glamour, from film industry to the TV scene to the world of pop and music. The year has been an eventful one.
As the year comes to an end, we bring to you the best of 2019, beginning with the Oscars first. At the 91st edition of the Oscars, the Best Actor prize was taken by Rami Malek for his portrayal of Queen frontman Freddie Mercury in the biopic Bohemian Rhapsody. The film was the biggest overall winner of the night with 4 Oscars. British actress Olivia Colman took home the Best Actress crown for The Favourite, while the Best Movie was given to road trip movie Green Book. Mexican filmmaker Alfonso Cuarón won the Best Director Oscar for his semi-autobiographical film Roma, which also won awards for foreign language film and cinematography. The 72nd annual Cannes Film Festival took place with Parasite, a wickedly humorous suspense movie about class struggles, winning the top Palme d'Or prize. The prize for Best Director went to the Dardenne brothers for Young Ahmed, and the screenwriting prize was awarded for Celine Sciamma for Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Emily Beecham was named Best Actress for her performance in Jennifer Hosner's Little Joe, while Antonio Banderas won the Best Actor prize for Pedro Almodovar's Pain and Glory. Much before the Oscars in Cannes, the season of award ceremony started off with the Golden Globes awarding some of the best talent in the world of TV and cinema. Bohemian Rhapsody won the Best Film and Best Actor in Drama, while the road trip movie Green Book won the award for the Best Comic Movie. It also took home awards for Best Screenplay and Best Supporting Actor. In the television category, Netflix's Freshman series, The Kominsky Method, won Best Comedy or Musical, and star Michael Douglas won Best Actor in a Comedy or Musical. And FX's The Americans won Best Drama for its 6th and final season. The International Emmy awards that recognize excellence in television, started with Australian thriller series Safe Harbour, bagging the award for the Best Miniseries, while the Best Drama British drama Mac Mafia won the award for the Best Drama. Hungary took home its first ever Emmy award, with Marina Guerra picking up the Best Actress honour for her role in Oroktel. In the world of music, the biggest musical award, the Grammy, viewed Casey Musgraves winning 4 awards, including Album of the Year for Golden Hour. Childish Gambino's This Is America won both Record and Song of the Year in a breakthrough for rap at the most prestigious honours in the music business. Global cinema is incomplete without talking about the Indian film industry. India's biggest film festival, the International Film Festival of India, or IFFI, at Goa's Panaji, was a star-studded event. At the Golden Jubilee edition, veteran actor Rajnikanth was conferred with a special award, the Icon of Golden Jubilee Award, for his contribution to Indian cinema. The award was presented to him by none other than Shahanshah of Bollywood, Amitabh Bachchan. French actress Isabelle Huppert received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the ceremony. The festival opened with the Italian film Despite the Fog, directed by Goran Paskalijevic, while Tram Fabric screened at the Mid-Fest. Iranian movie Marghe and Her Mother was the closing movie of the festival, which closed with the theme Ek Bharat, Shresht Bharat. Let's now move on to the highest grossing movies of the year. At the box office, Avengers Endgame broke all records, becoming the highest grossing movie of the year, with a collection of $2.8 billion worldwide. It was an extraordinary year for Disney too, with 4 of the top 5 best performing movies internationally. Disney's remake of The Lion King took $1.6 billion globally. Spider-Man Far From Home remained in 3rd place, while Disney's Captain Marvel and Toy Story 4 took 4th and 5th positions respectively. Philip Todd's Joker remained the most talked about movie of the year. The movie grossed over $1 billion worldwide at the box office, becoming the first R-rated movie to do so. The dark drama Joker, about the origins of the villainous character, won the Golden Lion Award at the 2019 Venice Film Festival, while actor Joaquin Phoenix won many hearts for his portrayal of the Joker, a character with many shades. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
So that was 2019. What to expect in the new year 2020. Next, we'll be looking at some of the big stories that we'll be tracking in the new year, looking ahead 2020. And the big story that we'll be tracking is US-China trade deal. Now, there's a positive movement. Phase one of the deal has been agreed by both the countries, but it is more complex than that. It is also about the strategic and economic supremacy in the world in which both US and China are locked in. There are issues such as the Hong Kong protest, democracy that the US supports. That is further complicating the matter. We'll have to see how that plays out in the year 2020. Let's go on to the next big story that we'll be tracking in the new year. The next big story is going to be Brexit and the future. Now, with Boris Johnson returning as the Prime Minister, the road to Brexit has become clearer. Perhaps most of the new year will go in the actual transition. But now Boris Johnson will also have to think about what after that. Issues like economy, boosting investment, boosting the local infrastructure, also the impending perhaps Scottish referendum is something that the leader of the country, of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, will have to think and worry about. Moving on to the next big story, big theme that we'll be focusing on in the new year is the stability in West Asia. Now, 2019 saw the complete elimination of the ISIS from Syria. But will that peace last for long? There is already a scramble for power by the regional powers. There is aggression by Turkey as well. Also, we'll have to see what kind of political stability does Israel reach and what kind of space does Palestine gain in the new year as well. So another big issue that is likely to make news and headlines in the new year 2020. Moving on to the next story that we'll be particularly focusing on are the elections in Africa. Now, when most of the stories coming out of the continent, of the various countries in Africa, are about ethnic violence, are about epidemics, are about political chaos, democracy in election gain a lot of prominence. Now, several elections are lined up in African countries, whether we talk about Burundi, whether we talk about Sudan or Tanzania. So these elections, democracy in Africa and its further development would be a crucial aspect, crucial focus in the new year of 2020. We'll go on to the next big theme and story that we'll be focusing on, COP26 and climate change. We just discussed ways in which COP25 was a disappointment in Madrid, but will that change in COP26 when it takes place in UK, in Glasgow? And will the powerful nations, the biggest emitter, give some space to the countries that are trying to come on their own and also participate in the cut in emissions that is expected of them? How will that turn? How will people realize, the world leaders realize that the climate crisis, the climate emergency is now? Those were some of the highlights, big news, big stories that we'll be focusing in the new year. And with that, we conclude this very special edition of Global Scan. Greetings for the new year from our entire team. We're leaving you with these images of 2019. Goodbye for now. Part of this.